Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome again. It's another episode of After Wednesday. I'm having some technical difficulties on my end this evening. Please excuse it. I know usually you're used to seeing a big blue title slide with my very low-tech writing and the name of our guest. So I'll keep working on that as we get started this evening. But I'm going to jump right into it. Tonight, my guest is a fantastic writer and an entrepreneur, and we're going to get into all of that too. Mike Perkins. How you doing this evening, Mike?
I'm doing great. How you guys doing?
There he is. All right, I want to just jump right into it. I was looking at your basically I was looking at your CV on LinkedIn.
Oh, okay.
and reviewing everything, and you write in a lot of different formats and for a lot of different reasons. Sort of what were your writing influences early on? Were you a literary person, or were you more genre driven? Sort of what?
Oh, very.
Yeah.
Very. I was a voracious reader growing up, thanks to my parents. That was one rule that they had, that we could have as many books as we wanted. Whenever you wanted a new book, you could have one. And I grew up reading a lot and working in bookstores for a very long time, all through my high school and college years, and even after college. And it was always a major part of my life, and I got a degree as well in it.
Yeah. Where'd you get a degree from?
Geneseo, State University of New York.
Mm-hmm. And what were some of your favorite authors when you were growing up?
Hemingway. I'm kind of obligated to do so. And he was one of the first ones that I first devoured everything that author had written. I just kept going after everything. And then in college, when I was getting my journalism degree, I was introduced to new journalism, so I went after Tom Wolfe and Faulkner and, of course, Hunter Thompson, and went through all of those as well. But it's been a ride that has taken me through a lot of different authors. You just end up wanting to read everything that someone does, and then you run out of stuff, so you have to find somebody new.
How much would you say then? Because I consider Hemingway's prose to be very concrete, very direct, not frilly.
Right.
Do you sort of aspire to that in how you initially maybe start writing, or is that sort of an end goal for you?
No, it's definitely an end goal, because it's something that influences everything that you write, where if you can take something out, you do. There's that great line from A River Runs Through It, where they said the art of writing lay in thrift, which is great. If you can say something in half as many words, go ahead and do it. And it's something that has been the guiding light in anything that I've ever written, where you just go through and you find anything that doesn't need to be there, or anything that you can say more concisely, and you just cut it out. And it's especially important now, I think, with people reading less and less and losing their attention spans more and more. So you need to be able to get your ideas across much, much more concisely.
Yeah. Is that what's sort of a draw then for writing for comics? Because comics is a very precise, often requires a very precise type of writing.
Yeah, it's a continual challenge, and with comics, it has that benefit where you have to figure out the shortest amount of content you can use to get some information across. But also, it allows you this amazing amount of latitude where you can do anything. If you're writing for television or for film, you have to keep in mind budgets all the time, and not only budgets, but what you're writing for. And with comics, you don't have that limitation. You can write anything you want, as long as you can get it on the page and get it within the amount of pages you're working in. That's really your only limitation.
What was your first comic that you read that sort of turned that corner for you? You talked about how literature, how Hemingway and Faulkner and Hunter S. Thompson obviously influenced you. What comic writers influenced you?
Okay, so I would say the first comic that I read that really, really struck me in a literary fashion was probably Preacher, and I was reading that in high school and right in the beginning of college, and that was the first time that I said to myself, "Whoa, this is something that can reach beyond just the general effect I had when I was reading, my Hulk comics growing up or X-Men comics growing up, and not to, especially I would put Hulk out there as something where they tried to do a lot of literary things, or a little more literary, depending on the run that you caught. But yeah, Preacher was the first time that I went through and said, "Well, oh, this is there's a little bit more here. There's something extra here that we could work with."
In segueing from that, I want to start talking a little bit about the comic I came to know you through, which was Beware. And you began Beware a few years ago. How long had it been sort of gestating for you?
Well, Will and I, Will is my brother, and he's also the art director over at 2 and 5, and he draws Beware with me and conceives it with me. And it's something that we had for a long time. We'd sat around and we talked about all the great old science fiction stories that we'd read and loved, and movies that we'd seen and loved, and shows like Twilight Zone that we had just grown up severely influencing us, not only in what we want to create, but just in the things that we love in general. And we wanted to do stuff like that, but we couldn't figure out exactly the way to encompass all of the different stories that we wanted to tell. So we just kind of, going back and forth as Will and I would hang out, we would say, come up with different stories and different ideas, but none of them had any kind of cohesive nature with regard to an overall story. So we came up with the idea of a town, Haven Hollows, where we could have all of these stories take place. So it gave us that kind of freedom to tell any story that we wanted, no matter what it was.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting you say about the process of sort of putting together small elements to make up something that ends up sort of being something larger.
Right.
What were some of Beware's influences then? Because the stories really, and I've pulled up the trade paper or the collection here for everyone to see. The stories sort of balance between scares and humor and sort of a really increasing darkness as you get later into the stories. Was that sort of always the plan, or did you just have sort of the initial story, the Frogman from Neptune story, and then it was just a natural progression?
Well, we had come up with a lot of different story ideas, and before I finished the script for Frogman from Neptune, which, I would argue is kind of dark in and of itself. You do have frogmen stealing babies to kind of disintegrate them for their ammonia, but
right.
It definitely did get darker as it went along. And what we had done is we had come up with the general idea, general outline for a bunch of different stories. And this is a 12-issue arc eventually when it completes. But we've got many more stories that we had come up with than we'll actually end up putting in there. So hopefully we'll do some shorts and stuff to get some of those to be come to life as well. Mm-hmm. But as we were doing even Frogmen, we got a few pages into that, and we came to, actually there's a page right in the third or fourth page of Frogmen where you'll see that the lead character swears a little bit.
Right.
And we were trying to decide whether or not to include that, whether that would be too much or not. And we're saying, these aren't stories for children.
Right.
These aren't, this isn't a young adult comic. This is a comic for adults, regardless of what it looks like. So we wanted to have that option to be as dark as we wanted to. Not that every story is going to be that dark, but it was definitely it was something that developed as we were doing it. But it was a conversation we had really early on, and it's a continuing conversation, to be honest.
Yeah, is that stemming because you have one story in there that's done by another artist and writer. I don't want to mangle the name.
Oh, Rolf.
Yes.
Yes,
How
Rolf
did?
is he's another one of our creators at 215. He did Blue Moth as well.
Mhm.
And Blue Moth is just one of my favorite comics that we put out, and in general, both for the art and the content. Not that I know exactly what's going on in Blue Moth, and Rolf won't tell me because he's not done with it yet. But
Yeah.
I just love Rolf. I love his work, and I really wanted to see what he would do within the Beware universe. And man, he really surprised me with what he put together. I mean, I absolutely love it, but I couldn't believe it was even crazier than what I had handed him. A world where there are frogmen from Neptune and fungal zombies and quantum teleportation, and as per usual, Rolf said, "Well, that's just simply not weird enough for me. I'm going to push it even more."
Is that something that you and your brother are really hoping for? It's interesting that you mentioned the word you're creating a universe. Do you want to invite as many people into the universe to contribute to it? Is that something that's come up in conversation?
Oh yeah, many times, and we've spoken to a lot of different creators. In fact, Eric Grissom, who is doing Planet Gigantic with Will.
Hmm.
Will did a short in Planet Gigantic, and Eric also did Dead Horse as well. He's just well, we put him on a short for Beware that he wanted to do, and he came back to us and said, actually, you know what? I wanted this to be a short, and I ended up doing an entire comic. So we're going to be including that in the next volume of Beware once we put that
Hmm.
together. So yeah, we've been talking to a lot of different creators, and we want to keep having more and more join in the universe.
Yeah.
That's
For
part of
people.
the whole philosophy that we're trying to put through with 215, that it is a rising tide lifts all boats. We want to have people working on each other's stuff and feeding off of each other's creativity.
If you're tuning in late, my guest tonight is Mike Perkins, co-creator of Beware Comics and also editor-in-chief of 215 Inc. And I want to take this opportunity to segue to talk about 215. I'm going to bring up on the screen here the page over at Comixology, which lists all of your titles. You editor-in-chief of 215 Inc. Sort of, how did that come about to want to, to want to start your own publishing platform? I know a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to publish my own comic through my own website. You guys seem to have really upped the ante and said, well, let's just publish a bunch of different titles.
Well, this is a company that was founded a few years ago, actually quite a few years ago now, by Andrew Del Quadro.
Mm-hmm.
And we came on in 2011 working through Beware, and I just started helping out a little bit more with the company, adding just an editorial to it. And especially with things like, we wanted to make sure that our books had just an editorial pass and an artistic pass over it for little things,
Mm-hmm.
like as we move over into a digital world. There are a lot of things that just don't translate. The old rules about having a cover and a logo that will hit you from 3 feet away on the comic book shelf, that does not translate to a thumbnail online.
Yeah.
So there are little things that we needed to make changes just to and working with creators is something that I've always loved, and it's always been one of my favorite parts of the creative process is, dealing with my friends' projects as well as mine and talking together about what we're working on and how we can make it better and having that fresh eye. So it's a huge part of keeping my creative juices flowing is working with other creators. So it was just something where we kept working more and more, and here we are.
How did because it takes a lot of guts to say that I'm going to strike out on my own. I don't want to work for any of the big two or even now the big four. I guess you could also you could say. What did you put a lot of? I guess I'm kind of curious about what motivated you to sort of go that independent path, other than just feeding your own creativity? What books were you seeing that, or what creators had you talked to that sort of stoked that fire a little bit more?
Well, what really brought us to 2 and 5 was Will had a relationship with Stephen Lindsay, who was with 2 and 5, who did Jesus Hates Zombies.
Mm-hmm.
And he was also from Rochester, New York, which is my hometown.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what drew us to 2 and 5. And once we got there, we just really liked what they were doing when we met so many great creators and really believed in so many of the books that they were putting out. And it just really was the place that we wanted to be. And then as we kept working with them more and more to get the opportunity to keep working with more great creators and work on more great books, it's really been so rewarding and something that I just don't think that I would have had the opportunity to do at any of the other publishing houses. At least not so quickly.
Right. With a book like Flutter, which has garnered quite a bit of praise for its subject matter, and I want you to, if you could you tell people a little bit about Flutter, because I don't want to sell it as short as, because I think it has a lot to say. What can you tell people about Flutter?
So Flutter is it's the story of a shape-changing girl who changes into a boy to get the girl of her dreams. To give you a 1-second little overview of it. And so Jenny Wood put that together, and she's currently putting together the 2nd volume of that. And Jeff McComsey did the illustration on it, who is from Fubar, who I'm sure you've heard of. They've had a wealth of success over there. And that was an incredible book to work on. One of the first ones that I was involved from the very beginning with at 215, and it's just been wonderful to work on. And Jenny's actually just put out with us her first young adult novel, A Boy Like Me, which I was the editor on as well, and had the honor to work on with Jenny very, very closely over quite a few weeks, putting that together and just polishing her wonderful creation there. But very much along the same lines, Boy Like Me is the story of a transgendered woman who is coming to terms with the fact that that's exactly what she is, and the fact that she grows up in North Carolina doesn't really much.
With the success of Flutter, I want to also ask you about another title right now that 215 has found some success with, that maybe you can speak to, and that is Enormous, which is exactly as it sounds. I remember seeing this book in the shop the first time. It made me stop. The guy had to put it on a stand, up on the table, and I was instantly, my little buzzer went off in my head. I went, "Ooh, what's this?" And immediately started flipping pages. Sort of, tell us a little bit about the history of this project with Enormous and deciding on the format and the story and all of that. How did this all come about?
So Enormous was originally over at Image, and as you said, it was an oversized issue. They did a one-shot there that Tim Daniel, the creator and writer, had wanted to do a lot more with it, but that was all that Image was willing to do with the project. So he came to us because he wanted to keep it creator-owned. He wanted to have his hand what could be done or what couldn't be done. And he had heard, in his own words, some good things about what we were doing with creator-owned and digital. So he wanted to see what we could do, and we talked to him about what we could offer and what we could put together for him, and he really liked it. So we started off just going through the issues, and he got Mehdi, who is an incredible artist from Morocco, right out of college. Just absolutely blowing everything up with his artwork. And we had a great time putting it together. I worked with him editorially on all the books, and we went through, and we've just been trying to keep up with the tide and popularity of this book that everybody really does seem to love.
It's interesting that you mentioned that Image, which has been so heralded, and I'm not knocking Image. I'm just curious. Image which has been heralded as a place that is sort of complete creative freedom to do these things, drops this particular book. Have you run into people who've had a project somewhere else that have come into, you don't have to name names, I'm just curious, that have pitched it, have come to 215 to try to pitch it, and is that a common practice, I guess, in comic publishing?
In fact, if you'll look back on our Comixology site, you'll see a title called Mind Games, and that's from Jim Starlin.
Oh,
and,
that's
that's
right.
a continuation. That's a continuation of his Hardcore Station series from DC back from '98, I believe it was. And that was I mean, you can, if you'll look up the history of Jim Starlin with Hardcore Station, you'll have no trouble finding many interviews with him talking about the frustrations he had with that series, both with the editorial decisions that DC made and forced upon him, and also with how they just had absolutely no promotion with it. They just kind of let it die on the table. So he was very, very frustrated with how that title was dealt with. That's a second row, second from the right there.
Yes.
And he was just quite frustrated. So again, he said he had heard some good things about how we were dealing with creator-owned comics, and he definitely wanted to keep his hand in this a lot more. And so he put it out as an illustrated novel with us, which is something that, you know, I really just don't think that DC or Marvel would have had the balls to do that, to even attempt an illustrated novel. But they don't. But and that's not to knock them per se, but they just don't have the kind of freedom to do that, where someone would say, what, an illustrated novel from DC or Marvel? I mean, they just, I don't. It's a hard sell, but that's something that we believed in, obviously, Jim, and in the project. So it was something we wanted to give a chance to get people's eyes on.
It's interesting you mentioned Jim Starling. What other sort of, because he's an absolute classic creator. Have you met a lot of classic creators that have expressed similar frustrations about projects?
Well, we Angelica Tomorrow is a project that we just finished the digital run of. Okay, the 6 issues there. We're going to be putting out a trade of that as well, and that's put out by David Liss, who did Black Panther back in the day.
Yeah.
And same situation. He had this project that people, they didn't. Some people, I guess, didn't see the value in it. But I mean, if you look at that book, the story is incredible. The art is gorgeous. I can't believe that anybody would have an issue with that book. Wouldn't want to put it out.
You point out too that this is 215 is about digital comics, and what are, in your opinion, sort of the pluses and drawbacks of digital comics publishing as it continues to grow and proliferate, as more and more people realize who want to make comics, they can make comics now and put them online and make it available. What are you seeing as more pluses and drawbacks of sort of digital comics publishing as you're just in the mix with it?
Right. Well, a lot of what we're dealing with 215 is seeing out there that there's such an open area in between where you might get published with DC, Marvel, Dark Horse, Image, or even IDW or Action Lab, some of the smaller guys, and then the guys who are self-publishing and getting no eyes, no help, no backup or anything, because they don't have anyone doing any editorial, they don't have anyone doing any marketing, they don't have any brand behind them at all for someone to say, oh, this is something that I could take a look at. So, right now, digital comics are obviously very, very oversaturated because everybody is trying to jump on there. So what we're trying to do is identify those books that really do deserve a second look, deserve not to be lost in the mix, and we want to give people the help and the leverage that they deserve, and they might not be able to get just doing it on their own. So we, again, in the spirit of a rising tide lifting all boats, and we've got a lot of books that really they are only going to work digitally. That it's not something that we can ever sell in print, other than at certain conventions and stuff like that. There are certain books where we have that, like Flutter, where we could have released those as individual issues, but it's just as a trade, or Angelica Tomorrow, where we released them digitally first, and now we're going to go for a trade early next year. And then with Enormous, where we knew that had the kind of legs where we could offer that in individual issues in print. And then we're going to be doing those digitally as well. We just know that is where it's going, so it's not something that can be ignored.
It's interesting you say that about digital comics and thinking about it. As you're writing in your brother's drawing Beware, how differently do you have to think about the format? As far as you're writing for digital format, and your brother is obviously drawing for, or are you? I mean, what is that process?
Well, there are technical considerations, such as like spreads, which obviously are going to read a lot differently if someone is reading it on their tablet held in a portrait mode rather than a landscape. Mm-hmm. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. But there's a lot of freedom as well. So like with Beware, we're not during the trades as the print offering. There's no need to be constricted by the typical 22-page format, which, if you start printing up or writing a 24 or 26-page comic, the printing costs really start going up quite a bit just by adding a few pages. Well, that's not something that we need to even worry about. So, for the next issue of Beware, which is Prehistoric Minds,
yes.
Will and I have joked about this being our dinosaur-sized issue. So, it's going to be much more than your traditional 22 pages. And there's no problem with that. There's no issue, no pun intended, with that at all. Because we don't have those restrictions. Once we package it all together in a trade, it doesn't matter if one is a 32-page comic and one is an 18-page comic, and then we decide to throw some shorts in there. It just doesn't matter. And it's wonderful to have that kind of freedom that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Do you think with the current comics landscape, with the overwhelming amount of comics now in digital and print, do you think that we're beginning to run into problems, or that we will begin to see a problem of more style over substance, more so than before, just because there's just going to be so much?
I mean, that's you're talking about an issue that's already pretty prevalent in comics. So I don't really know that that's but I don't know that that's a problem either. Mm-hmm, I think we're definitely going to see the same kind of boon of quantity over quality, but I don't see that as a bad thing. I think the more people that we have creating, the better, and the people who are in it just because they want to jump on some kind of rise in popularity, they probably won't be around very long. The people who are here to really, because they really love it and that's what they want to, that's the medium in which they want to express themselves, they're going to stick with it. And I really do believe that the cream always rises to the top, and that people who have something to say and are really working at their art, they're going to be seen, they're going to be heard.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity. We have a very unique opportunity here with talking to you to ask you, because you are the editor-in-chief of a publishing company. What can you tell people who will tune in, either tuning in tonight or will tune in later after we post this, of course, on YouTube? What can you tell them about the submission process for 215 Inc.?
Well, 215 has open submissions all the time. We always want to be meeting new talent, seeing new books. That's the lifeblood of the comic industry and our company in particular. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be said about the professionalism of submitting, because we do get a lot of submissions in, and anything that you can do to make yourself stand out is definitely going to help. But it's not this isn't a formal process here. We're not like rejecting people because they have typos or because they haven't submitted in the right format. Anything that I can really, really say is make it easier on us to read your stuff. Give us something that is easy to download, easy to read. We get a lot of submissions where they make very, very small mistakes. Something like that's too low res to read the print, and art is great, but if we can't actually read what the copy is, that's a bad thing. So anything that you can do to make it easier on us is definitely to your advantage. Just give us a quick sentence to let us know what the book is about. Give us a little overview, and just let us see your work. And it's everything. We have people submitting everything from completed comics to hey, I just have a script with a few pages or maybe nothing at all. And there's nothing that there are a lot of people who say, oh man, I wouldn't submit anything until I have a completed comic. But you know what? If you're just sending a script and you've got a great idea and you're looking to get in there, that means that we can be involved even earlier on the creative process. We can identify and avoid problems before they happen. We can make things even better. So it's not even anything.
I noticed.
One way.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I noticed when you were talking earlier about your literary influences that you never mentioned anyone overtly science fictional. So I'm kind of curious how you came to write science fiction, or what's the tag? They have a great tagline with Beware. It's not enough fiction to be science fiction, and what is it? Not enough fiction to be real science, something along those lines.
Not enough fiction to be science fiction, too much science to be anything else.
There you go. Yeah.
I would say more than science fiction, and I read a lot of Robert Heinlein growing up. I read a lot of Orwell, and it was more dystopian, I would say, was an influence for me more than science fiction. But the science fiction part of it comes mostly from things like Twilight Zone, my love of old science fiction movies, movies like The Thing from Another World, The Fly, which I just watched last night, and Will and I, when I was home in New York, we just watched The Thing from Another World again, which is still just so incredible. And well, actually, it was The Thing. It was John Carpenter's version of it from '82.
Oh yes.
So it was a lot of love of those movies growing up, and Mystery Science Theater 3000. To be honest, that was a huge influence, which is where I suppose a lot of the comedic element of Beware comes in.
What was your favorite?
But yeah, so go ahead.
What was your favorite Mystery Science Theater episode?
Oh my gosh, other than the what was the EGA was a huge one, believe it or not, which I think is one of the lesser known ones, and it just happened to be in one of the DVD collections that I had. But I watched that one probably far too much. But I really think that they peaked with the movie itself. It was one of those wonderful surprises where you're like, oh man, they're making a movie of one of my favorite TV shows, and it just ends up being so much better than you could have even ever hoped. It's just such a wonderful surprise when that happens.
Yeah. What advice do you have? You're a writer yourself. You write for many various different reasons and vocation.
No, it's all for money.
It's all for money. Well, I hope so. Yes, of course you want to make a living at it. But what advice do you have for young writers, sort of thinking about script writing for comics or even for other types of media?
Are we talking about what kind of advice are we looking for? Career advice, or for just for creation in general?
Creation in general.
Uh, it's something that I even have written up on my office wall. If you're not editing, you're not writing. I think too many people, the process of writing can be so arduous and so draining sometimes. And again, I don't mean that in a negative way. It's just you have to pour so much of yourself to your creator that the thought they just avoid it or they do really haphazardly. And I really believe that the editing part should be 2/3 of the writing part of it. So I think that's my biggest bit of advice, that just the editing, the going through and polishing and trying to give it a look, whatever you're creating, with those fresh eyes, so that you can identify problems before your reader is going to. That's one of the biggest things for me.
Well, I think that is some very sound.
But of course, I'm an editor, so
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
I might be biased.
Well, I think that's very sound and a sage that you have given us, and I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight. Can you hang out for a second while I wrap up?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in this week. Please feel free to share the show via Google+, Facebook, Twitter, or over on the YouTube page. Just pick your poison. It's all fine with us. You'll find the necessary links. On Twitter, if you're interested, you can follow me. My Twitter handle is @JLDPROD2002. If you have questions for Mike, you can contact him through the 215 Inc., and they are @215 Inc. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Again, thank you so much, everybody, and thank you again to Mike. And everybody be safe, and we will see you next time.